Hello mga ka-Buttercup! If you are new to our channel, please like and subscribe. Enjoy the rest of the video!
Phylum Arthropoda, Crustaceans. Subphylum Crustacea is under the phylum Arthropoda, which basically means insects of the sea. Pancrustacea can be divided into two groups: marine decapods, which contains or composed of crabs, prawns, and lobsters. Second is the freshwater Parancupoda, composed of the waterplay Daphnia. Pancrustacea is monophyletic groups with insects, meaning they can be described and classified in the same taxon and share the most recent ancestor with insects. Hexapods arose from within the crustacean branch. Hexapods are six-legged arthropod that belongs in the class Insecta. Pancrustacea is basically a hexapod, but the only thing is that it arose in in a crustacean branch. A shell of a pancrustacea is composed of protein, chitin, which is a fibrous substance, and some calcareous material. Carapace, or the hard upper shell of a crustacean, is a dorsal cuticle covering some of the thoracic or cephalothoracic and their abdominal segment. The segment has a pair of appendages, which is a biramous appendage, and can be divided into two forms of branch. Crustacean usually has 2 to 3 tagmata. Tagmata means regions that are specialized for a specific purpose. Usually it is a head, thorax, and abdomen, or a cephalothorax and an abdomen. And a crustacean has 2 pairs of antennae and maxillae, 1 pair of mandibles, and crustaceans are usually marines, freshwaters, and terrestrial. Most crustaceans are predators, suspension feeders, scavengers, or farmers. Examples of crustaceans are lobsters, crabs, shrimp, krill, barnacles, water fleas. Body plan of a crustaceans, its segments that are not covered by the carapace have dorsal tergum and lateral pleurites. Dorsal means upper and tergum means back. And as I have mentioned, they have an ancestral biramous appendages, and those appendages serves various specialized functions such as for sensing, feeding, tasting, locomotion, reproduction, and gas exchange. They also have a protopod, or the base, exopod, the lateral, and endopod, which is the media of the media. There are many modifications of an ancestral biramous appendages, or it could be uniramos, meaning a single branch or an undivided branch. Telson is the posterior end of the trunk. It forms a tail end fan, and it helps in swimming and escaping. The anus lies on the telson. Ms. Kagara would continue to discuss the respiration and circulation of crustaceans.
So the crustacean gills can also be used for excretion. So when they excrete the nitrogenous waste by just diffusing it directly from their gills into the water. So napo ni siya lain nga organ nga also include in the excretory process, pero instead of removal of nitrogenous waste, it is also used for osmoregulation. So it is called the antennal or the maxillary glands, and they are located in the head. So kini siyang medyo dull green ang color, and it has an opening, and it when opens near the antenna, then it is the antenna gland. And so when it opens near the maxilla, so it is called the maxillary gland. So how does it work? So the hemosyl hydrostatic pressure forces fluid filtration at the end sac. And as fluid is being pushed into the end sac and traveled through the end sac, and so all the salts and the organisms need glucose and amino acid, and water will be reabsorbed, and then any of the waste that doesn't need will be maintained. Then the waste nga i-filter will travel through the tubule and padulong sa bladder, and once nga naanay siya sa bladder, the urine will be secreted. There is a tube, like there is a bladder nga part that opens either near sa antenna or near sa maxilla. So, crustaceans have open circulatory system and their coelom has been filled with hemolymph, and so this is now called the hemocoel. So, how do circulatory works in crustaceans? So, they have a single chamber dorsal heart that pumps blood through the arteries. So, it pumps blood through here, kining vein nga kani siya kaning red nga kaning sa tunga antud diri, so it pumps blood to wherever it needs to go, so where the tissues need the oxygen, and then the deoxygenated blood will return through the veins to the central part of the body to something called the sternal sinus. And from the sternal sinus, the oxygenated blood will travel to the gills. So the oxygenated blood returns to the area near the heart called the pericardial sinus. And so good, the blood will enter into the heart through the ostium. So diri musulod ang blood padung sa heart, and so that the heart will pump it through the body again. So mauto ang cycle or the process sa blood circulation sa crustaceans. And also the blood in crustacean can either hemoglobin or it can be hemocyanin. So kining hemocyanin, it will appear as blue, or whereas the hemoglobin, it will appear as the color red. So the crustaceans have a complete gut. They have a mouth, intestine, and anus. Also, a crustacean can use a variety of methods to undergo gas exchange, and terrestrial crustaceans, they can use trachea and lungs, whereas aquatic, they oftentimes have gills. And there are some crustacean naman nga napoy gills ug lungs if they spend a significant amount of time in both in water and on land. So when we are looking at the gills of the aquatic crustaceans, they have a thin cuticle that covers and their gulls, so and it is thin enough to allow the gas exchange. And so the gills are located on the dorsal part of the appendages. So we can see it here in the picture. Mo ni siya ang kining feather-like nga part. A lot of crustaceans will protect their gills. And mao ni siya ang ginatawag nato nga gill cavity. So ang purpose sa gill cavity is to protect the gill of the crustaceans. So in smaller crustaceans, they don't have lungs or trachea or gills or anything that has the larger crustaceans have, but instead smaller crustaceans undergo exchange through diffusion.
So, hello everyone. So, I will be discussing about the muscular and the nervous system, and also the reproduction of phylum Crustacea. So, crustaceans have two major muscle types for locomotion, and both of these muscles are striated muscles. So they have their flexor muscles and extensor muscles. So these muscles is quite familiar to us. The flexor muscles move an appendage towards the body, so this is flexing, and then the extensor muscles move away from the body, so extending. And both of these muscles work antagonistic to one another. And next is, and then we also have a well-developed nervous system in crustaceans, and they have a couple of components. They have these supraesophageal ganglia, which is the brain of the crustaceans, and they also have a subesophageal ganglia, which is used to control an insect's mouth parts, salivary glands, and neck muscles. So the antennas, the mouth, and the antennal glands, or anything that's in the head region, they provide nerves to that, and they also have a double ventral nerve, and that's somehow like a beads that runs down the ventral side of the crustacean, and this ventral nerve cord provides a pair of ganglia for every segment of the organism, and they also provide nerves for movement to all of those different segments so that each segment can move in sync. So in addition to that, nervous tissues, crustaceans also have a variety of other organs that they can use to sense their environment. They have a well-developed eyes, statocysts, tactile hairs for cuticle, and under cuticle, it is to sense changes in the water and their environment, as well as receptors for taste and smell. So next we have, so for the reproduction of crustaceans, they have this term dioecious, but there are some monoecious species, and those that are monoecious, they can either be parthenogenic or they can require cross fertilization. And also, for the most part, crustaceans brood their young. So a lot of shrimps, lobsters, and crabs like that will do is they will either harbor their eggs near the abdomen or near their cephalothorax or in their actual claws, and they carry their eggs around with them. And also this allows them to protect their young until they hatch and are ready to be independent. So once the young hatch from the eggs, they can either emerge as kind of neonator or immature versions of the adult, and this is a form of direct development, or they can hatch as a larval stage, which is a form of indirect development. So if a crustacean undergoes indirect development, then they have to undergo a process of metamorphosis to reach their adult stage. And also, the most common larval stage that we see in crustaceans that undergo metamorphosis is this Notice larval stage, and the Nauplius larva is actually ancestral to all crustaceans. So the common shared ancestor of all crustaceans has this Nauplius larval stage in its life cycle, and the Nauplius larva have also three pairs of appendages. That's for swimming. And a median eye, you can see very well because it's kind of small. So as the larvae is undergoing growth, mm, it will go through a series of molt, and with each molt, it will gain another type of appendage or appendages. So molting is the making of a larger cuticle after ecdysis has occurred. And when we say ecdysis, is the shedding of the old cuticle, and both of these processes are required for growth and also for the organism to protect itself from predators and diseases. And also other things like that. The process is actually triggered by environmental chaos, which will start a cascade and start to decrease. the level of mold inhibiting hormone, and with that, it is normally present to keep the organism from undergoing a disease. But once the levels of this hormone decrease, the levels of diazine will increase, and it is the hormone that's responsible for initiating this process and also shed its old cuticle. So that's all for my topic.
Subphylum Crustacea is incredibly diverse, and so we're not going to talk about every single order and class that belongs to this subphylum. I will talk about a few, just give you some examples of the diversity that's out there. So we'll begin with class Ostracoda, and ostracods have a bivalve carapace. You can see that in the picture here. It's like a clam-like appearance, so they almost look like a clam that has this like legs sticking out, and they also resemble another type of crustacean that we'll talk about in a couple of slides called Diplostraca. And this group contains something called the water fleece or Daphnia, which you may have heard of because a lot of studies have been done with Daphnia. And then they have a fused thorax and abdomen, which in this picture, I don't know if you can see it really well. And one interesting thing about ostracods is when it's time to undergo mating, some of them will emit light to attract mates, so they're bioluminescent, and they can occur in both marine and freshwater environments. And they're very important in both of these environments, and they're very abundant because they make up a fundamental level of the food web in these aquatic environments. So they are a form of zooplankton, or zooplankton, as some people call them. You'll hear me say that term a lot of over the next couple slides because the zooplankton are primary consumers, and they're also a major food source for a variety of other organisms. So the health of the zooplankton in an aquatic environment is a really good indicator of the success of that area, of that environment. Zooplankton are suspension feeders, and they can be scavengers. So they can eat photosynthetic bacteria and other microorganisms. And they can also scavenge off of dead material in the water column. And there are a lot of fossils of these ostracods all over the world, and they're a really good indicator of where you can find oil deposits because of course, oil is made up of a lot of carbon from ancient organisms. And so, where these are located is a good indicator that you might find some oil there. And next is the Plasmorrhopedia is a small class of cave-dwelling crustaceans, and these crustaceans are thought to closely resemble the ancestral form for all crustaceans. So the shared common ancestor of all crustaceans is thought to look like this, guys. And this is because they have no tagmatization, and they also have a pair of lateral biramous appendages on every single one of their segments. And all their appendages are virtually identical to one another. So you can see that in this picture here in their cartoon, they're showing those appendages. They're a bit hard to see, it's a little small, but you can see the protopod here that splits into the exopod and endopod. And you can also see it if you look at this picture down here. These appendages, you can probably see a little bit better that they definitely are biramous. And one really interesting thing about class is that the first identified venomous crustacean belongs to this class. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it was pretty interesting. Members of the class Brachiopoda get their name from the leaf-like legs that they use for respiration, and these leaf-like legs are actually called phylopodia, so you can actually see them here. This kind of leaf-like appendages in this area are the phylopodia, and then they're also present on these brachiopods as these extensions towards the posterior end, and they use those for respiration. They can also use their phylopodia for suspension feeding and for locomotion. Most brachiopods live in freshwater environments where they play a major role in the food web. So these are also an important zooplankton class. And one of the most famous brachiopods is Daphnia, or the water flea, which is an example is this guy in the picture. Next is the copepods, or organisms that belong to the subclass Copepoda, are some of the most diverse and abundant crustaceans on the planet. They have no carapace and they have no abdominal appendages, which you can see in this picture here. They've only appendages they have are their antenna walls that are on their anterior end, and then a pair of appendages at their posterior end, and that's about it. They do also have a medial eye, which they retain from their nauplius larval stage, and so most crustaceans, as they've undergoing development, will lose that nauseous eye, but instead the copepods have retained that eye into adulthood. Copepods can either have symbiotic relationships with other organisms, they can be parasitic, or they can be free living, and they are a major component of the food web in aquatic environments. So they are another important zooplankton. They have also economic and medicinal importance as well. So they play a major role as a primary consumer, which helps to keep the amount of photosynthetic algae and things down in aquatic systems. And they can be filter feeders or they can be scavengers. And then they also play an important role as prey for another aquatic animals like we've seen in the other zooplankton. They work in a similar way in the food web, and then they can also be parasitic themselves. So they can attach themselves to vertebrates or invertebrates and act as parasites. And they can also be intermediate hosts to other parasites. Also, they've been known to be intermediate hosts for human tapeworm and nematodes. So they have a lot of different importance on multiple levels. Members.
Another crustacean groups, subclass Cervidia, previously thought to be mollusk, sessile, mottle larvae attached to substrate using sticky antennae, calcareous palate shell, mouse, leg for filter feeding, marine, cause ship fouling and drag, AI barnacle. Another crustacean group is class Malacostraca, most diverse class, more than 20,000 species. Its orders are Amphipoda, skeleton shrimp, Euphysiotia krill, Isopoda, krillbugs, Decapoda, crabs or lobsters. Another crustacean groups is order Isophoda or order Isopoda. These are terrestrial marines and freshwaters. Only true terrestrial crustaceans mostly live in moist environments because cuticle cannot properly prevent water loss, nor carapaces compound eyes. Gills or pseudotrachea and abdominal legs. Pseudotrachea are less complex than insectrachea, may be able to roll into a ball for protection, i.e. peel bugs, roly-polies, tongue loss. Another crustacean group called Order Decapoda. There are 10 feet, 5 pairs of walking legs, and 3 pairs of maxipilids. Maxipilids. Legs may be chelate, modified with pincers, i.e. crabs, crayfish, often used for food, i.e. lobsters, crabs, true shrimps, and crayfish. Thank you.